The kingdom of Eldoria had always whispered tales of beauty and power, of queens who ruled with wisdom and warriors whose names were sung in every hall. But no one sang of Alara, not anymore. She was a woman of 28 winters, still young by most accounts, but in the eyes of the court she was too old to be a bride. Every glance from the nobles carried a silent judgment. Every smile was edged with mockery. Alara walked the winding streets of the capital with her cloak pulled tightly around her shoulders. The chill of early autumn cut through the city, and the scent of burning wood and wet stone hung in the air. She passed windows filled with laughter and music, reminders of the life she was expected to have but never received. She had long since learned to move like a shadow, to exist quietly in the corners where no one noticed her. Yet, even in her solitude, a part of her longed for something she could not name. A flicker of hope, stubborn and defiant, stirred inside her chest every time she glimpsed the grand palace from the hilltop. She knew the whispers about her, how she had missed the season of marriage, how her beauty had faded too soon, how she was destined to remain alone. But she refused to let those words define her. The summons had come unexpectedly. A letter sealed with the royal crest, instructing her to appear at the palace for a matter of diplomacy. She had hesitated, knowing the court's cruelty, yet curiosity and a sense of duty had drawn her to accept. She dressed in her finest gown, simple yet elegant, and let the autumn wind guide her steps. The palace loomed ahead, tall and imposing, its walls carved with symbols of the old magic that once ruled Eldoria. Statues of kings and queens, their faces frozen in pride and authority, lined the courtyards. The halls echoed with the murmur of courtiers, their voices laced with laughter and sharp words. When Alara entered, she felt every eye turn to her, and the sting of judgment was immediate. "Isn't that the woman past her prime?" whispered a young nobleman to his companion, his tone dripping with disdain. "She dares appear at court? How amusing," replied the companion, smirking. Alara held her head high, letting neither anger nor shame show. She had grown skilled at wearing a mask of calm, a shield against the world's cruelty. She moved past them, her eyes scanning the grand hall until they fell upon the source of the summons, the royal throne, now empty, with courtiers gathered in a semicircle. It was then that he appeared. The air seemed to shift, heavy and electric, as the doors at the far end of the hall opened. A hush fell over the room. Tall, broad, and impossibly commanding, Lord Kalen, the most feared alpha of the northern lands, stepped inside. His presence was overwhelming, like a storm contained in human form. Black fur lined his cloak, glinting faintly in the torchlight, and his eyes, sharp and piercing, swept across the hall with the precision of a predator. Rumors of Kalen were legend. He was ruthless in battle, merciless to enemies, and utterly unyielding in his demands. Yet now, as he approached, his gaze fixed on Alara, the whispers in the court fell silent. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a spark, a warning. Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. She was no stranger to fear, but this was different. Kalen's presence was not just intimidating, it was magnetic, drawing her attention and holding it as if the world had narrowed to the space between them. "Step forward, Alara of Eldoria." Kalen's voice rang through the hall, low and commanding. The words were not a question, yet they held no threat. They carried weight, like the pull of destiny. Alara stepped forward, her heart beating steadily despite the tumult in her chest. She had faced judgment, ridicule, and isolation, but she had never faced him. As she drew closer, she noticed the faintest hint of curiosity in his expression, something beneath the surface of his fierce reputation. The nobles tried to hide their surprise, but their whispers betrayed them. He notices her," one murmured. "He spoke to her." Kalen stopped before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He reached out and, in a gesture that stunned the court, took her hand. His grip was firm, confident, but not cruel. The hall held its collective breath. "You are mine," he said, his voice carrying both promise and challenge. The words were not a claim of possession in the way the nobles feared, but a declaration that no one else would decide her fate. The Alpha's gaze bore into hers, and for the first time Alara felt seen, not as a woman past her prime, not as a forgotten shadow, but as someone powerful and worthy. The court erupted in murmurs. Some sneered, others gasped. But Alara felt only a strange calm wash over her, mingled with a flicker of excitement and fear. She could not understand the sudden pull between them, nor the way her heart seemed to leap at the sound of his voice. Kaelin did not release her hand. Instead, he turned to the court, and his presence alone silenced their chatter. "No one will speak of her as less than she is," he said. His words were sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "She is mine to protect. She is mine to honor. And anyone who dares challenge that will face me." A silence fell over the hall, broken only by the distant wind whistling through the high windows. Ilara's pulse quickened. The fear she had carried all her life, the fear of judgment, of rejection, of being unseen, began to shift into something else. A tentative spark of hope, of possibility, ignited within her. After the formalities, Kaelin led her away from the court, into the private gardens of the palace. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light over fountains and statues. The air smelled of damp earth and jasmine. Kaelin released her hand but remained close, his presence a constant force. "You do not understand why I am here," Kaelin said softly, almost to himself. Yet his words carried enough weight that Ilara could not ignore them. "I do not," she admitted. Her voice steady despite the fluttering of nerves within her. Kaelin's gaze softened, just slightly, and he studied her as if trying to read the depths of her soul. "The world has cast you aside," he said. "It believes you are too old, too late, too insignificant. But I see you." Ilara felt a lump rise in her throat. No one had ever looked at her that way. Not her family, not the nobles, not the men who had once proposed for convenience or power. She felt an unfamiliar combination of fear, trust, and longing. "Why me?" she asked, almost a whisper. Kaelin's eyes darkened, filled with shadows and fire. "Because you are not afraid of me," he said. "Because you have survived what others could not. Because you are mine." The words resonated deep within her. For the first time in her life, Ilara felt that her existence mattered, that she was no longer invisible, no longer defined by age or expectation. And yet a quiet tension lingered. The sense that the world outside these gardens was still dangerous, still cruel, and that her connection to Kaelin would bring both wonder and peril. The moonlight shimmered on the fountain's water, and Ilara and Kaelin stood side by side, hands almost touching, hearts beginning to race in sync. The night was still, but the air between them thrummed with unspoken promises, hidden fears, and the first spark of a bond that would change everything. But beyond the garden walls, shadows moved. Eyes watched. Whispers traveled. The court would not forget, and neither would those who sought to exploit weakness. Danger, intrigue, and dark magic lurked on the edges of their lives, waiting for the moment to strike. And yet, in that quiet, silver-lit garden, Ilara allowed herself a single, daring thought. Perhaps she was not too old to begin a life she had never dreamed of. Perhaps the alpha who claimed her hand was the one force strong enough to break the chains the world had placed upon her. Cliffhanger. As Ilara looked into Kaelin's eyes, a chilling breeze swept through the garden. A shadow detached itself from the darkness beyond the walls, a figure cloaked in black, watching, waiting. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. The court's cruelty was one thing, but this was something far more dangerous, and Kaelin's hand almost instinctively moved closer to hers. The night had only just begun, and neither of them knew how deep the shadows would reach. The dawn broke over Eldoria like a hesitant promise. Silver light spilled through the palace windows, and the city stirred with the quiet murmur of morning. Ilara awoke in a guest chamber that had been prepared for her, a room rich with velvet curtains, soft carpets, and the faint scent of jasmine. It was more than she had expected, yet she did not feel at ease. Her thoughts were still tangled in the events of the previous night, the court's whispers, the noble's scorn and Kaelin's presence, the alpha's declaration. "You're mine," lingered in her mind, as sharp and thrilling as the first frost of winter. She could not forget the way he had taken her hand, his gaze steady and unyielding. There had been no force, no cruelty, only a quiet, commanding certainty. It frightened her and drew her in equal measure. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Ilara," a gentle voice called. It was Lyra, one of the palace attendants who had quietly guided her in the past days. "Lord Kaelin wishes to speak with you in the gardens. He requests your company." Ilara's stomach tightened. She had barely slept, barely dared to think of what might happen. Yet a part of her, an impulsive, stubborn part, wanted to see him again. She dressed quickly, choosing a muted gown that would allow her to move freely, and made her way to the gardens. The palace gardens in daylight were a different world from the quiet, silver-lit space of the previous night. Sunlight kissed the fountains and statues, and the air was fragrant with the scent of flowers. Birds sang softly from the trees, and the wind rustled through the leaves in a comforting rhythm. Kalen was there standing near a marble fountain, his cloak draped over his broad shoulders. When he saw her, his eyes softened just slightly. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he offered a small, rare smile, the kind that could unsettle and comfort all at once. "Ilara," he said finally, his voice calm, yet carrying a weight that made her heart skip. "I trust your rest was enough?" "Yes," she replied, though her voice was steadier than she felt. "Thank you." Kalen studied her silently, as if weighing her very soul. "I will not lie," he said after a moment. "Your arrival here has stirred more than curiosity in me. I am not accustomed to uncertainty, and you make me feel it." Ilara blinked. "Uncertainty?" This was a man who commanded armies, who could crush kingdoms if he willed it. And yet he admitted to feeling something unfamiliar, a vulnerability that mirrored her own hesitation. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kalen's gaze softened, but the edges of his presence remained sharp, like a sword waiting to be drawn. "You are not like the others," he said. "The court fears you, judges you, mocks you, but I see strength where they see weakness, courage where they see doubt. You survive where most would falter." Ilara's chest tightened. She had spent years convincing herself that the world had no place for her, that she was too old, too ordinary, too invisible. Yet here, before her, stood a man whose reputation rivaled kings, who looked at her as though she were essential to the fate of the land itself. She began, unsure what words could convey her thoughts. "I am not sure I understand why you care." Kalen's gaze darkened, hinting at shadows deeper than any court intrigue. "Care is too weak a word," he said. "You intrigue me. You challenge me, and perhaps you frighten me in ways I did not know possible." The confession sent a shiver through Ilara, a mix of fear and exhilaration. She had never met someone like him, someone so dangerous yet capable of revealing such raw honesty. Before she could reply, a sudden noise echoed from the edge of the garden. A rustle of leaves, a shadow slipping through the trees. Kalen's head snapped toward the movement, his body shifting with lethal grace. "Ilara," he said, his voice sharp now, warning her. "Stay behind me." From the shadows, a figure emerged, a cloaked stranger moving with stealth and intent. Ilara's heart pounded as the figure drew closer. In that instant, Kalen's protective instincts flared. His hands moved in a fluid, practiced motion, and before Ilara could react, he intercepted the stranger. The garden became a blur of motion. Kalen fought with precision and controlled force, each movement measured, deadly, and yet restrained enough to avoid unnecessary harm. The cloaked stranger lunged at Ilara, and Kalen deflected the attack, his hand brushing hers in the process. A spark of warmth and tension passed between them, a connection neither could ignore. The fight ended almost as quickly as it began. The stranger fled, leaving behind a faint trace of black smoke that lingered in the crisp morning air. Kalen turned to Ilara, his chest heaving slightly, eyes blazing with a mix of fury and concern. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, his voice low and tense. "Yes," she said, though her hands trembled slightly. "Thanks to you." Kalen's gaze held hers for a long moment, and the courtly judgment, the whispers of the city, and the years of solitude melted away. In that instant, there was only him and her, bound by a strange electric connection neither fully understood. "You see," he said finally after a pause, "the world is not safe for you. Not yet, and I will not allow it to harm you." Ilara swallowed, the weight of his words settling into her bones. She had spent her life hiding, running from disappointment and ridicule. Now for the first time, someone powerful, terrifying, and enigmatic claimed her safety, not out of duty, but out of choice. "Kalen," she began, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Why me? Why not someone your own age, someone suitable?" His eyes softened again, revealing a hint of something vulnerable beneath the fierce alpha exterior. "Because suitability is a concept invented by fear and convention," he said. "I do not care for suitability. I care for truth, strength, and courage. You have all three. That is why I chose you." Ilara felt a lump in her throat. Never had she been seen for who she truly was. Never had someone looked past appearances, past judgment, past fear, and recognized her worth. And yet, even in this moment of wonder, a shadow lingered in her mind. The memory of whispered plots, the assassin who had nearly struck her in the night, and the danger that still circled them like a predator waiting to strike. Kalen must have sensed her hesitation. He reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, deliberate, and yet carried the weight of command. "Do not be afraid," he said softly. "Fear is natural, but it does not have to control you." Not with me. Alara's heart raced. She wanted to believe him, to trust in the bond forming between them. And yet, a part of her held back, wary of the power he wielded, wary of the danger that seemed to follow him like a shadow. The morning passed in a delicate dance of conversation and quiet observation. Kalen showed her parts of the palace and gardens few had ever seen, sharing fragments of his world, his clan in the northern mountains, the ancient magic that lingered in the land, and the curse that had haunted his bloodline for centuries. Alara listened, captivated and unsettled. The stories of dark prophecies and ancient enemies made her heart pound, but the threads of connection between her and Kalen grew stronger with each passing moment. She could see the man beneath the alpha, the loneliness, the longing, the glimpses of vulnerability hidden behind layers of strength and fearsome reputation. As dusk approached, casting long shadows over the gardens, Kalen led Alara to a secluded terrace. The sky burned in shades of crimson and gold, and the wind carried the scent of distant forests. "Alara," he said, turning to face her, "the world will never accept you fully. The court will continue to judge, the enemies will continue to plot, and danger will always linger. But you are not alone anymore, and neither am I." Alara felt tears prick her eyes. Never had she been offered such protection, such recognition, such possibility. The bond between them pulsed in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. Cliffhanger. A sudden, chilling howl echoed from the palace gates, a sound unlike any she had heard before, filled with malice and hunger. Kalen stiffened instantly, his hand gripping hers. The alpha's eyes darkened, and a warning tremor ran through his voice. "They are coming, and this time you will need more than courage to survive." Alara's breath caught. Danger was no longer a distant threat. It had arrived at their doorstep, and for the first time she realized that her fate was irrevocably tied to the most feared alpha in all Eldoria. The howl echoed through the halls of the palace like a curse, shaking the very walls of Eldoria. Alara's heart pounded, and she instinctively moved closer to Kalen. The alpha's presence was both a shield and a storm, and she clung to it, feeling the weight of his protection and the heat of his unwavering focus. "They are scouts," Kalen said, his voice low and urgent, "sent to watch, to test, to see if we are weak. But we are not. Not today." Alara followed him through the corridors, moving swiftly yet silently. Though she had grown accustomed to solitude and caution, Kylan's command made her aware of every sound, every shadow, every heartbeat. She was learning to see the world as he did, danger woven into beauty, threat hidden in routine, power masked by appearances. The palace guards had been alerted, forming lines along the corridors. Kalen did not speak to them. A glance was enough. They knew the alpha of the northern mountains. They had heard the tales of his ruthlessness and skill, of his unbroken rule over a clan feared across the kingdom, and now they sensed the stakes of this moment. Alara felt the tension tightening around her chest. She was no longer simply a visitor or a spectator. She was caught in the center of forces far larger than herself. And yet a spark of courage kindled inside her. She had survived years of dismissal and neglect, and now for the first time she realized she had a role, a voice, and a choice. Kalen led her to a secluded chamber deep within the palace, a room she had never seen before. The walls were lined with books and ancient scrolls, the floor covered with thick rugs, and a fire flickered in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room. Kalen closed the door behind them, and the quiet that followed was almost deafening. "Alara," he said, finally turning to her, his expression unreadable. "I need to tell you something. Something you must understand before we go further." She nodded, sensing the gravity in his tone. "I am cursed," he began. "My bloodline has carried a darkness for centuries. An ancient queen, betrayed and humiliated, placed a binding spell on my family. Every male heir must claim a bride willingly, or our clan falls into chaos. The bond is not only between me and a woman, it is tied to the survival of everything I hold dear. Ilara's eyes widened. The words were heavy, almost impossible to comprehend. She had known him as a man of power, of fearsome reputation, but never had she imagined a story like this. "Why tell me this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Because you are part of it now," Kalen said, his gaze steady and intense. "The moment I claimed you, I made a choice. But the choice must be mutual. You cannot be forced into this bond, or the curse will consume us both. I need your courage, your trust, and your will. Nothing less will suffice." Ilara's mind raced. The fear she had always carried, the fear of rejection, of judgment, of inadequacy, surged within her. And yet beneath it something stronger stirred. A sense of purpose, a thrill of connection, and a quiet, undeniable attraction to the alpha who had claimed her hand. "Why me?" she asked, almost a whisper. "Why not someone else?" Kalen stepped closer, and the shadows of the fire played across his face, highlighting the sharp lines of his jaw and the intensity of his eyes. "Because you are not afraid of me," he said. "Because you have survived everything the world has thrown at you. Because you are strong, resilient, and capable of more than you know. And because you are mine if you choose to be." Ilara felt her chest tighten. Never had she been seen like this. Never had someone looked past appearances, past judgment, past fear, and recognized her worth. And yet, even in this moment of wonder, a shadow lingered in her mind. The memory of the cloaked stranger, the lurking danger, and the whispers of enemies plotting in the dark. Before she could respond, a messenger burst into the room, breathless and wide-eyed. "My lord, my lady, the court, there is unrest. Nobles are plotting against you. They call for your immediate presence." Kalen's expression darkened. He did not hesitate. "Stay here," he commanded. "Do not leave this chamber. I will handle them." Ilara wanted to argue, to insist she could help, but she knew the alpha would not be swayed. She nodded, feeling the tension coil in her chest like a living thing. She was learning that with Kalen, patience was a test and trust was a weapon. The hours passed slowly. Ilara watched the flickering fire, listening to the distant echoes of voices and footsteps. She thought about the curse, about the bond forming between her and Kalen, and about the strange, intoxicating mix of fear and attraction that twisted through her. When Kalen returned, the tension around him had not diminished. He moved with a predator's grace, his eyes scanning every corner as if the shadows themselves carried secrets. He closed the door behind him and finally turned to her, expression unreadable. "They tried to manipulate the court against me," he said. "They will not succeed, not while I am here. But you must understand, Ilara, that our enemies are clever, patient, and ruthless. They will not stop until they see weakness in either of us." Ilara nodded, absorbing his words. The danger was real and it was close. But the presence of Kalen, his strength, his protection, his unwavering gaze, gave her a strange, thrilling sense of security. She was no longer invisible, no longer dismissed, no longer defined by the fear and ridicule of others. She was part of something larger, something fierce and something dangerous. For the first time, Ilara allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She stepped closer to Kalen, feeling the heat of his body, the strength in his stance, the quiet power that radiated from him. "I am not afraid," she said softly, though her heart raced. "Not of you, not anymore." Kalen's eyes softened, just slightly, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "That is good," he said, "because fear has no place in what is to come. Only trust. Only choice." Ilara felt a shiver run through her. She had spent her life hiding from judgment, from danger, from disappointment, and now, for the first time, she realized she could step into a life that demanded courage, resilience, and trust. A life that was dangerous, yes, but also filled with connection, possibility, and even love. The day drew to a close, and Kalen led her to a balcony overlooking the city. The sky was painted in hues of amber and violet, and the wind carried the scent of autumn leaves in distant forests. The palace below was alive with light and sound, yet up here in the quiet, Ilara felt a strange sense of calm. Kalen stood close, his presence steady and commanding. "Ilara," he said, voice low and deliberate, "our bond is new, fragile, and dangerous, but it is real, and I will do everything in my power to protect it." And you. She looked up at him, seeing not only the alpha feared by kings and armies, but the man beneath, the one who carried loneliness, responsibility, and a longing for connection. I will trust you, she said, her voice firm though her heart trembled. But I will also fight alongside you. If danger comes, I will not hide. Kalen's eyes darkened with a mixture of respect, pride, and something softer, almost tender. Good, he said. Because the world outside these walls is not gentle, and neither am I. But together, perhaps we can face it. The wind whispered around them, carrying a hint of something ancient and powerful. Alara shivered, not from cold, but from the realization that her life had changed forever. She was no longer a shadow in the court, no longer a woman dismissed as too old, too ordinary, too invisible. She was a partner, a fighter, and a bond forged in courage, trust, and undeniable attraction. Cliffhanger. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, a new figure emerged in the streets below, a messenger cloaked in black carrying a sealed scroll. Kalen's eyes narrowed as he recognized the insignia of an old enemy. He turned to Alara, his jaw tight with resolve. They are coming, he said. And this time, the danger will not be easy to defeat. Alara's breath caught in her throat. The bond between them, fragile yet fierce, would soon be tested in ways neither of them could yet imagine. And as night fell over Eldoria, she understood one truth. There would be no turning back. She was part of Kalen's world now, and his world was dangerous, dark, and full of fire. Night fell over Eldoria like a velvet cloak, heavy with shadows and secrets. The streets were quiet, but Alara knew danger lurked in every corner. The messenger with the sealed scroll had vanished, leaving only a sense of urgency and dread. Kalen stood at the window of their chamber, dark eyes fixed on the city below, muscles tense with alertness. Alara, he said, his voice low, almost a growl. They have chosen to act. The enemies who seek to manipulate the court to seize power and to harm you. They will strike tonight. Ilara's stomach tightened, but she did not flinch. The fear that had followed her for years, the fear of being powerless, unseen, forgotten, had begun to shift. She felt a fire within her, a determination she had never known. I am ready, she said, her voice steady. I will not hide. I will face this with you. Kalen turned, studying her with a mixture of admiration and caution. You must understand, Alara, this is not merely danger from swords or spies. The magic in our world, the curses that lingered for centuries, can reach through shadows and strike at the unwary. You must trust me completely, and trust yourself even more. Alara nodded. She had trusted Kalen's strength before, but now she realized that trust alone was not enough. She would need courage, intelligence, and heart, and more than anything, she would need to choose her own path. Together they left the palace under the cover of darkness. Kalen's cloak fluttered like a dark banner, and Alara felt the steady beat of his determination against her own racing heart. They moved silently through the city, avoiding the patrols of guards and the curious eyes of nobles who still whispered about the too old woman claimed by the Northern Alpha. Their destination was an old tower at the edge of the city, a place long abandoned but now occupied by one of Kalen's spies. It was there they hoped to uncover the plot against them and gain an advantage over their unseen enemies. The tower was dark and silent as they approached, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and old wood. Kalen motioned for Alara to stay behind as he scouted ahead, and she obeyed, her senses alert to every sound, every shadow, every flicker of movement. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, a cloaked assassin, dagger in hand, eyes glinting with malice. Alara froze, her instincts screaming. Kalen was already in motion, a blur of calculated strength and precision. He intercepted the assassin with a swift, controlled strike, disarming the figure and pinning them against the wall. Alara's heart raced. She had seen Kalen fight before, but never this close, never with such raw intensity, and yet, even as danger closed in, she felt a strange thrill, an acknowledgement of the bond that tied them together. Stay close, Kalen instructed, his voice steady, commanding and protective all at once. Do not interfere unless I ask you to. Alara nodded, keeping a careful distance but refusing to hide. She watched, absorbing every movement, every decision, every moment of courage. This was no longer a world she could navigate with passivity. She had to act, to think, to be part of the fight. After neutralizing the assassin, Kalen searched the tower. Hidden beneath loose floorboards, he found a cache of letters and plans, proof of the plot against them, evidence of betrayal from within the court itself. The documents were enough to reveal the scope of their enemies and to understand the danger that had been gathering for weeks. "This is worse than I thought," Kalen muttered, eyes scanning the papers. "They are not merely scheming, they intend to strike decisively, to destabilize the kingdom and to challenge me openly." Elara stepped closer, her gaze steady. "Then we must act," she said. "We cannot wait for them to make the first move. We must confront them before they corner us." Kalen's eyes softened slightly as he looked at her. "You are braver than I expected," he said, "and perhaps stronger than even I realize. But remember, this is not only about courage. It is about choice. Every action we take will shape what comes next, and there will be consequences we cannot foresee." Elara nodded again, feeling the weight of his words. The fire in her chest grew stronger. She had spent years following the rules, hiding, waiting. Now she was part of something larger, something dangerous and something real. She would choose her own path, even if it meant stepping into darkness. They returned to the palace, careful to avoid notice, and Kalen summoned his closest advisors and trusted warriors. Together they began to plan, to anticipate every move, every betrayal, every shadow of threat. Elara listened and contributed, offering insight, intuition, and a perspective that surprised even Kalen. Her presence was no longer passive. She was a strategist, a partner, and a force to be reckoned with. As the night deepened, the tension in the palace grew. The courtiers whispered, rumors spread, and unseen eyes watched their every move. Elara felt a thrill of fear and determination, knowing that she was no longer a bystander. She was bound to Kalen not only by his claim, but by choice, trust, and shared destiny. Kalen and Elara moved to the balcony overlooking the city once more. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the rooftops and gardens. The wind carried the faint scent of autumn leaves, of fire, and of something ancient and powerful. "Elara," Kalen said, his voice quiet but intense. "Tonight we may face our greatest test. The enemies we have uncovered are only a part of the danger. There are forces older, darker, and more cunning than any of us imagined." Elara's chest tightened. "I am ready," she said, meeting his gaze. "I will stand with you, fight with you, and face whatever comes." Kalen's expression softened, and for a brief moment the fierce alpha was replaced by a man, vulnerable, longing, and profoundly connected to the woman before him. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You are brave," he said, "and I need you by my side, not just as mine, but as an equal. Together we can face anything." Elara felt a warmth spread through her, a mix of trust, fear, and exhilaration. She had never imagined such connection, such acknowledgement, such possibility, and yet she knew that the night ahead would test them both in ways they could not foresee. The first signs of movement appeared as shadows crept through the palace grounds. Figures cloaked in black, silent and calculated, approached the gates. Kalen's warriors moved into position, silent and ready. The tension was almost unbearable, the air thick with anticipation. Elara stood beside Kalen, hand brushing his, the physical contact sending a current of reassurance through both of them. They were no longer two individuals, separate, fearful, and uncertain. They were a unit, bound by choice, trust, and the spark of something deeper, something neither of them fully understood but both felt. The enemy moved closer, and the battle began, not with swords drawn immediately, but with strategy, cunning, and the clash of wills. Kalen led his warriors with unmatched precision, his eyes always on the larger picture, always aware of the stakes. Elara contributed, guiding, observing, and anticipating moves that even Kalen might not have expected. The fight was intense but brief. The attackers were skilled, but they had underestimated Kalen's strength and Elara's insight. The shadows were driven back, leaving only the echo of their retreating footsteps and the distant murmur of the city below. As silence returned to the palace, Elara and Kalen stood together on the balcony, breathing heavily, hearts racing and minds aware of the danger still looming. They had survived the first test, but both knew it was only the beginning. Kalen looked at her, eyes dark and intense, filled with admiration and something softer, almost tender. "You have chosen well," he said. "Tonight you proved your courage, your wisdom, and your strength. And yet the world is not done with us. There are greater trials ahead, and we must be ready." Elara nodded, feeling a fierce pride and a quiet fear. The court, the enemies, and the dark magic of Eldoria would not rest. But for the first time she felt that she was not alone. She had chosen to stand with Kaelin, and he had chosen to stand with her. Together they were stronger than any shadow, any curse, any threat, cliffhanger. As the first light of dawn touched the city, a whisper of magic brushed against Ilara's senses, a cold, ancient force lingering at the edges of perception. Kaelin stiffened, sensing the same presence. "The curse is awakening," he murmured, eyes narrowing. "And this time, it will not wait for us to be ready," Ilara's breath caught. The trials ahead would test their bond, their courage, and their hearts. And she realized with both dread and determination that their story was far from over. The first light of dawn crept over Eldoria, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The city, still recovering from the night's chaos, seemed deceptively calm. Yet within the palace the tension was palpable. Kaelin and Ilara stood together in the grand hall, their hands barely touching, each feeling the weight of the impending storm. The curse, ancient and unyielding, had awakened. The air around them felt heavy, electric, as if the palace itself were holding its breath. Shadows moved in corners, whispers of power brushing against their senses, testing their courage, their bond, and their resolve. "Ilara," Kaelin said, his voice low, steady, yet carrying an intensity that made her pulse race. "Tonight we face the heart of the danger. Not the spies, not the assassins, but the curse itself. If we falter, everything we have fought for could be lost." Ilara's chest tightened, but she did not flinch. "I am not afraid," she said firmly, meeting his gaze. "I will face it with you." Kaelin's eyes softened, a rare glimmer of vulnerability piercing through his fierce alpha exterior. "Your courage? It strengthens me," he admitted. "Tonight we are not just fighting for survival. We are fighting for choice, for life, and for the bond between us. That bond, it is not weakness, it is our power." Together they moved toward the palace's inner sanctum, where the oldest magic of Eldoria lingered. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and a low hum of energy resonated through the walls. Every step forward felt heavier than the last, yet neither faltered. Ilara's hand brushed against Kaelin's, and she felt a surge of warmth and reassurance. Their bond, forged through trials, danger, and mutual trust, pulsed between them like an unbroken thread of light in the encroaching darkness. At the heart of the sanctum, an obsidian mirror awaited them. Its surface shimmered with shadows that writhed like living things, reflecting not only their images but the fears and doubts they had carried for years. The curse manifested here, ancient and sentient, feeding on uncertainty, hesitation, and fear. Kaelin stepped forward, placing a hand on the mirror. "This is the dark mirror," he explained. "It tests the soul, exposes weaknesses, and demands surrender. To survive, we must face ourselves, every doubt, every fear, every shadow, and we must stand together." Ilara's gaze met the mirror, and her reflection shifted, revealing scenes of rejection, ridicule, and solitude. Faces from her past whispered accusations. Shadows twisted her insecurities, and a cold weight pressed against her chest. For a moment she felt herself falter, the old fear creeping back. Kaelin moved beside her, steady and unyielding. "Do not look away," he said softly. "Do not fight it alone. Together we are stronger. You are not the girl they tried to break. You are more. You are mine, and I am yours. That is our choice, and that is our power." Ilara drew a deep breath, feeling the warmth of his hand and the unspoken promise in his words. Slowly, deliberately, she met her reflection. Instead of shrinking from the darkness, she acknowledged it, accepted it, and let it pass through her like fire purging the cold. Kaelin did the same, confronting the centuries of burden, the loneliness of leadership, and the shadows of the curse that had haunted his family for generations. Together, they faced the dark mirror, their reflections merging, their fears dissipating in the strength of their unity. The mirror shivered, dark smoke curling from its edges, and then shattered with a sound like thunder breaking in the mountains. Light spilled from the fragments, filling the room with warmth, and the shadows dissolved, retreating into nothingness. The curse had been confronted and broken, not by strength alone, but by courage, trust, and love. Ilara sank to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Kaelin knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. His eyes softened, his usual fierceness replaced by awe and deep admiration. "You have done it," he whispered. "We have done it together." Tears pricked Ilara's eyes. She had faced every fear, every doubt, and every shadow that had haunted her. And through it all, Kaelin had been beside her, not as a master, not as a protector only, but as a partner, a companion, and something she could not yet name. Kaelin helped her to her feet, and their hands found each other once more. The warmth between them was no longer merely physical. It was a bond of shared trials, of unspoken understanding, and of something infinitely deeper. Outside the palace, the city began to stir. The light of dawn reflected off the rooftops, and the people of Eldoria went about their lives unaware of the darkness that had just been lifted. Within the palace, however, change had already begun. The court, once rife with whispers and plots, felt the shift of power and courage. Kaelin's presence, now strengthened by Alara's unwavering support, was untouchable, not through fear, but through the undeniable strength of their unity. Kaelin turned to Alara, his expression intense yet tender. "Alara, you are mine," he said again, this time not as a declaration but as a promise. Not because of obligation, not because of fear, but because of choice. "And I am yours. That is the truth of us." Ilara's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "And I choose you," she said. "Not because you are Kaelin the Alpha, not because the world says we should be together, but because I trust you. I believe in you, and I want to be with you." For a long moment, silence fell between them, filled only by the beating of their hearts and the echo of the shattered curse. Then Kaelin pulled her close, and they stood together, bound not only by destiny but by choice, by courage, and by the shared knowledge that they could face whatever came next. The palace doors opened, and their closest allies entered, eyes wide with awe and respect. Kaelin and Alara had not only survived, they had transformed the world around them. The whispers of ridicule and doubt were replaced by recognition, admiration, and the undeniable truth that strength and unity could overcome even the darkest magic. As the sun rose higher, bathing Eldoria in golden light, Kaelin and Alara stood together on the palace balcony. The city below seemed peaceful, almost serene, yet they both knew that challenges would come again. But they also knew something far more important. They would face them together. Kaelin's hand brushed against Alara's cheek, and he gazed into her eyes with a tenderness few had ever seen. "We are stronger than the curse," he said softly. "Stronger than fear. Stronger than anyone who would try to tear us apart." Alara rested her forehead against his, feeling the warmth and reassurance of his presence. "Together," she whispered. "We are unstoppable together." The wind carried the scent of the distant forests of jasmine and firelight, of hope and renewal. The trials they had faced had forged them into something unbreakable, a partnership of trust, courage, and love that could not be challenged by shadows, magic, or men. Kaelin smiled, rare and genuine, as he held her close. "You are mine, Alara, and I will protect you, cherish you, and stand with you, for all our days." Alara's eyes shone with determination and gratitude. "And I am yours," she said, "not because I must be, but because I choose to be. Always." The city of Eldoria stretched out below them, bathed in the golden light of a new day. Shadows had been faced, curses had been broken, and a bond had been forged that would withstand any trial. Alara and Kaelin, once alone and uncertain, now stood as equals, united by courage, trust, and love that had survived the fire. And as they watched the sun rise together, they understood one simple truth. The world could be dangerous, cruel and unpredictable, but together, they were unstoppable.